Frank?
Frank sent us.
Did you bring a horse for me?
Well, looks like we're shy of one horse.
You brought too many.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 233 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca and as always joined by my fellow co-hosts Chris and Dave, and also joined by film music expert Charlie. How are you all?
Good evening, folks.
If you can't hear me, I'm playing the harmonica somewhere. I want to go, but I realised that sounded really shit, so...
And good evening, Charlie.
Hi, how you doing?
There we go, all right.
Yeah, I feel like we need to kind of bust out the harmonica really. But I don't think any of us play. I don't, sadly.
I don't know how difficult it is. Is harmonica a difficult
we should
instrument?
get
I don't know.
mode on to have a go.
I mean, I don't know. See, with guitar, you could theoretically like draw pictures of where your fingers are meant to be. What are you going to do with a harmonica? Just this thing jammed in your face.
Listeners, if you play the harmonica, and if
sing
you
to us and
playing,
expect us to talk.
yes, send us a clip of you playing.
That'd be weird.
Or send it to us on the socials. We'll gladly retweet it.
Yeah, unless you're crap, in which case we'll just laugh at it. No, we'll definitely retweet it then, actually. Yeah, no, fair enough, carry on. So, we took a little break last time, so Charlie wasn't with us last time because we were just doing a little review of the year. We actually were going to talk about John Wick 4, and we did. So for anyone just following the Westerns, we did, but we talked about a load of other things. We ended up talking about what we've seen this year, sort of cinematically and streaming and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it turned out to be a spring review.
So the main things we covered in terms of the longest segments would have been Creed and John Wick 4, so that's somewhere else. But we're back in the Old West now. Becca, what are we covering tonight?
Tonight, yes, we are kind of nearing the end of our All the Westerns trilogy. Tonight, we are reviewing Once Upon a Time in the West, starring Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson, Willie Strode, Mark Elam, Lionel Stander, Claudia Cardinale, Jason Robards, Gabriele Fazzetti, and many more. The score, classic score, Morricone, script by Sergio Donati, Sergio Leone, Dario Argento, and Bernardo Bertolucci, whose name I can't pronounce, directed by Sergio Leone, and released in 1968.
Charlie asked earlier if there was any nudity in this, and I think it's because he's got children, by the way. He wasn't just ringing up with like some Kleenex in his hand going, please, right? He wasn't just there going, I'm hoping. He's got children, and it's Easter holiday, so it was that. If I thought Bertolucci was involved, I'd have looked a bit closer, because his films are normally full of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to double check. Is it the same?
I was getting ready to update Chris's Fruity Corner.
Yeah. I was going to say, the Last Tango in Paris,
show.
The Dreamers, lots of other stuff like that. Obviously, as I say, that's why early screenings of Casino Royale, I couldn't stop blushing because I was thinking, I've seen her naked in stuff. Yeah, so...
That's why it says, if you look on IMDb.com, it says from a story by Bernardo Bertolucci, and it's like, oh, really? Eyebrow goes, whoop.
Yeah, this was, for me, just a quick bit of background. As I say, I've probably told this before, but our Western series has covered a while now, and it's been a while since I said it. My background in this film was really odd, in that Once Upon a Time in the West was a title I kept hearing. I'd seen Once Upon a Time in America. I knew of it. I was never particularly knowledgeable on Westerns. I'd seen a few. I'd seen bits and pieces of the Dollars Trilogy. I think I came to the Dollars Trilogy afterwards, actually, because it would have been 2003. And I read today this came out on DVD in November of that year. So I suspect I may have seen the Dollars trilogy already. It doesn't matter, it's lost to time. But definitely I was aware of Leone. I was aware of Once Upon a Time in America, which is a different film, although it's loosely thought of as sort of in thematically linked to this. And I saw the DVD box come out in the stores. And again, at the time of recording, not forever, but now on our social media, this is our little sort of picture for the podcast at the moment. And I was just taken by it. I was just taken by the look of it. And that quote about something to do with death, which Cheyenne says in the film. And I mentioned it, and there was really... The most random fact I'll ever give on this podcast is I once read an interview with Chris Eubank, and he said it was his favourite film, but being Chris Eubank and a bit pretentious, he had to say its Italian title. But yeah, it was his favourite film. So, I thought, well, if it's good enough for Chris Eubank,
It's good enough for Dave.
And I was at work, and I was talking to an older guy there, but older, not that much older than I am now, but older amongst the office. And he said, oh, it's an amazing film. And he did me a deal. He said, I'll tell you what, he said, buy it. And he said, if you don't like it, I will buy it back from you full price. And it was like $17.99 back when DVDs were. They'd gone through their first price drop, because when they first launched, they were more like 25 quid, bit like UHD now. But definitely before they started going down towards the sort of VHS prices, there was a period where they were about 17, 18 quid. And I went and bought it, and I watched it, and I came back in the next day, and he smiled at me, and he said, well, and I said, well, you're not getting it.
No, you're not.
I was just blown away by it. Back then, I mean, a DVD looks nothing special now. They look flat and colourless, but at the time it was a beautiful restoration. It looked really good on the screens of the time. The score blew me away. And it was a film I was completely comfortable with, in that very rarely do I not care at all about running time. We're talking of Once Upon a Time in America, I'm not objectively right, but I find that film too long. Whereas Lawrence of Arabia, the same length, I don't. It does depend on the film, but very rarely do I not care about running time at all. And I just didn't. It was a film that I don't care how long this takes, I just love it. And I've really fallen harder for a film. The only film I can think of outside of childhood where I had a relatively late screening of a classic that I fell for in the same way was probably The Graduate. So yeah, that's my background with it. I might go into first thoughts a bit later on. What about you guys in this film, Charlie?
Yeah, I first saw it on TV. It wasn't a movie-drone one, but I think it was probably on around the same time. And yeah, it's one of those films that, well, I just like you, I just fell in love with it straight away.
So it had a pretty sort of strong first impression on you.
Yeah.
You were a similar age to me. You'd probably been mid-teens then, if it was just after
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I was. If it came out in November, I was 27, so I saw it quite late. What about you guys?
For me, I picked it up on DVD in one of them like second-hand sort of places, because it's a film I always wanted to watch because I saw the Dollars trilogy first, and I heard like nothing but great things, like this is like probably the best one, like this is like the probably the best Western of his. So I was like, oh okay, it sounds interesting. That's worth a while. I forget how much it was. I think it was, I might have like paid maybe like £6 for it or something like that.
Definitely not on first release. Yeah.
No, yeah, it was. I think it was like maybe 2-3 years after it came out on DVD. I forget the exact year, but
it came out. Like I say, it's November 2003. It came out on DVD. I saw it.
Yeah, I want to say maybe it was like a year or so afterwards then. But I can't remember. But yeah, no, I mean, surprisingly, I've only ever watched it once, but it's one of those times where that viewing was enough, like to sort of cement it. I was like, I watched it once and I thought, yep, I agree. I think it is probably it's probably my favourite Western. And it's weird saying that out loud, knowing I've only sort of seen it once beforehand. If that makes any sense. So it's just, I'm just not.
That was enough to create that impression for you, Chris.
Yeah, it's just like it's like there was nothing bad I could say about it at all. It was just like, yeah, it just felt right saying, yeah, this is obviously just the best Western, clearly, and that was that.
Well, that's because only 7 or 8 were ever made.
Well, yes.
We're doing all the Westerns that
Becca?
Oh dear. So I kind of feel like the right Philistine. I mean, there's kind of like one movie buff in every family, and I think in my family if it's not myself, it's my dad or my uncle. It's me. But there's quite a few films I haven't seen. This is one of them. So in this kind of series, obviously, I don't know why, as I kind of mentioned at the very top of this series, obviously, like with my grandparents are like into sort of westerns, obviously, and John Wayne movies and sort of things like that. Just because that's the kind of the era that they grew up with, this kind of like boys' own adventure kind of type stories.
Boys' own?
An old fashioned. No, boys. Take that. Like Indiana Jones kind of style, like boys' apostrophe own stories, and that's kind of where that kind of era sort of comes from, really. This one it was a new one. I've heard about it, I read about it, sort of familiar with it. Obviously heard the soundtrack, heard the score. I kind of mentioned on the chat thread that we have for this team. We're kind of doing this backwards. I think we should have done the westerns first and then gone back and done all the Tarantino films, because you can kind of see how it feeds in, which I'm aware of anyway. But it's one of those movies that had kind of been on my list. Basically, I've not seen it until tonight. But I thought, well, we're going to come to it anyway, so I saved it up. I can definitely see why this. One of my fun facts is that this continually tops lists, sort of be it the AFI, BFI, 100 classic movies, 100 classic westerns, for example. You'll regularly find this atop those lists. And it's easy to see why. It's like epic, sprawling cinematography, monument value, looking very beautiful. Iconic score, definitely, which, if you're going to make a western movie, you're going to sort of, the score and soundtrack is going to sort of be tinged with it, really. Henry Fonda, cast against type, looking very striking, one of the kind of the most horrendous screen villains, I think, certainly in the western genre, that we've seen for a long, long time. And I'm sure his character pops up in there if I just have 100 villains, but I need to look that up. But I'm sure he's probably up there. Quite brutal. He's traditionally known for kind of more heroic or sort of lawman type roles as well. With bright, piercing blue eyes going right into your soul. I think in terms of this little if we had to rank, obviously we're not at the end of the series yet, but if we had to rank, this would probably be up there. Revelation for me has been last month's film, Western Set in the Snow, Great Silence, which was just incredible. And I thank Charlie for introducing that to me. It's amazing. So I think it would kind of rank a quick second, close second, behind that film for sure. But yeah, sadly, long story short, I'd not seen it until prepping for this podcast. I feel like I'm Philistine saying that. I do apologise. But yeah, it's fantastic. It looks great, sounds great. And it's one of the best westerns ever made, if not the best. So yeah, I can totally see why it's up there for sure.
I watched it about, just to sort of augment and throw in a few first thoughts this time. I've probably only seen it maybe 4 times. I saw it, like I say, in late 2003. Strange. I don't know what it was about that DVD pack. I mean, I knew the name, I knew the reputation, but I just kept looking at it and kept thinking about buying it as a speculative thing. I was a bit like that with the Wild Bunch, to be fair. And I think I've owned it twice. It took a long time to come to Blu-ray, and eventually I bought it. I don't know why, but I bought it in Canada. And it's funny because the back of the disc was in English and French.
Oh dear.
And it was the current cover, really. The original cover at the back of them, the front. The cover you see now is still the one that tends to get used. So I would have seen it then, and then I got it on Amazon about a year or so ago, and I watched it one night and showed it to my wife, and at the end of it, I felt a little emotional, and I don't know why. And I don't mean I was tearful. Just that visceral reaction you get to films sometimes, like Like even a Paddington film can make you feel really good, or It's a Wonderful Life, I tend to go straight to bed after I've seen it, which is no good if you watch it at 10 o'clock in the morning. But because I don't want to watch anything else, it engenders a feeling. Some of the Star Wars films can do that, because there's nothing that feels like it.
It kind of knocks you for six, doesn't it, emotionally?
It's not even just emotion, I think it's just the feeling. I suppose you can say emotion, you can substitute that word in. But emotion to me is like, you're crying, or you're very happy, or very sad. It's not even that, it's just I feel about this the way I feel about nothing else. Not necessarily better or worse, just nothing else feels like this, and nothing else makes me feel like this. And I just saw it then, and again I sat down and watched it again tonight, and just fantastic. And I even remember, I don't remember things like director's commentaries, not from 20 years ago. Maybe a little bit of Coppola's for The Godfather, the odd little snippet Lucas said on the Star Wars films, but very little. And all the way through I'm remembering Alex Cox said something there, and I'm just thinking, this must have been a very special screening to do that to me.
Burned into your skull, burned into your memory.
Doesn't mean I remember everything, and there'll be a lot, I'm sure, that Charlie, and certainly yourself in facts section, will come up with. I don't remember that, and I certainly don't remember where everything was shot. But and the odd thing came up afresh tonight. Max from Heart to Heart is in this film. You named him in the opening bit, Lionel Stander. He's got a really distinctive face, really distinctive voice, but I'm watching the film, and at the same time I grab my phone and look up the opening credits to Heart, because I know he narrated them. And you see him, and I'm like, it's the same bloody guy.
When they met, it was murder. Not the guy.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So,
yeah, I couldn't believe that. I was like, oh yeah, it's the same guy, obviously, because I think we talked about that on a previous podcast as well. Like, I've heard of it, I've seen the introduction, but I've never actually seen the show. I know about Rob Wagner just through Boston Powers, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah, it's like iconic opening, isn't it? When they met, it was Moido, and
this is late. This started in the late 70s, ran to the early 80s. It was Stephanie Powers, and they were both called Hart was their surname, Hart, Heart to Heart, and I think they were like private investigators, wealthy ones.
Yeah, and they're like husband and wife PI team or something like that.
And they've got like this servant there, Alfred, who's a guy called Max, who's got a dog called Freeway, who was the same breed as like Benji. I think it was that sort of breed. And that's all I really remember about it, except when they met, it was murder. And that's about it. But he's in it, and I didn't notice it in the previous 3 or 4 viewings.
It's the same guy.
Little facts we'll get into as we go through sequentially, like what happened to 1 or 2 of the actors. I'd never really thought about the first time, although whenever I see Jack Elam, I just think of the Cannonball Run.
There's another film I've not seen. Oh my gosh.
The Cannonball Run, he played like a very drunk doctor in it, who just kept injecting people. And of course he genuinely had a false eye as well, so he always looked a bit otherworldly because of that.
I did wonder. It looked a bit sort of kind of like one eye was looking one way, and
Some
I was like,
accident.
he's got a glass eye.
Yeah, it was an accident at school when he was a kid. It was speared by another kid when he was 11, so he lost his right eye.
Dear.
No, or his left eye. I can't remember. No, it's his left eye. Well, we'll go through a few things as we go through that. I just remember from commentaries. I'm not up to date, and I've done a huge amount of reading tonight. Although, as I say, I found out what became of a few actors that I didn't know. And they must have been said in commentaries, because certainly 1 or 2 of these things you think there's no way they wouldn't have mentioned that, but I don't remember it. But there you go. Shall we get into this, or do we want to go into opening thoughts on tonight's screening? I think Chris and Becca have. I mean, Charlie, you loved it initially. Have you watched it again for this?
Yeah, I watched it today, and it's still amazing, maybe more so, because I'm older. As well, and so I don't know, it just kind of was maybe a bit more kind of, or as transformative as I'd seen it previously. I mean, I saw it on TV, and it took ages to get to DVD. I mean, it didn't come onto DVD till 2003.
Yeah.
And because I remember being really excited it was coming out, because I hadn't seen it.
It was treated like a prestige release, though. I remember that.
Oh yeah, and it had a cardboard slip cover and everything, and I think it was a digipack, and it was great. And this, I mean, this is why kind of I get annoyed when Becca says apologises for being a philistine. At the end of the day,
I'm sorry.
no.
Now she's apologising for apologising.
Why you you see things when you see things, and in some cases it's just because it's really, really difficult to see things. And when you've got a film that may have been lauded at the time or popular at the time, and then it takes so long to come out for you to be able to see it at home, people maybe aren't aware of that film. And especially with something like a Western, where so a lot of people, Westerns are dad films, and they're men's films as well. And which you'd hope today's film would kind of change that, because it's got the kind of feminist slant as well. Yeah, so you kind of, and you'd hope that even this podcast, and when I say I mean collectively, all of your podcasts that you've done, as Dave, you expect us to talk, would then potentially influence people to see the films that they hadn't maybe been interested in or known about before. So
I think we've popularised James Bond. No one had heard of him before. But you're right, because we started with a few very obvious genre ones, and then we just do something we fancy. We're going to do Hitchcock soon, and I know loads of people have maybe seen one or two. You know?
I mean, especially
you'd be surprised.
Like several different eras.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I haven't seen it all.
Films.
I'm a long way from having seen it all.
Yeah.
And we won't cover it all either, but
all the Westerns.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, and I do know people who've said to me about one of our series, several of our series. They've said that never occurred to me, but I kind of enjoyed the show, so I had a go. And then you might be talking something a bit more esoteric, but at the other end of the shed thing as well, we did the fast films. And a few people went, I thought they were mindless. And I'm like, they are, but they're a laugh.
Yeah.
Well, it's like John Wick films that kind of always, they've kind of been on my radar, as it were.
I
just never got to them, because I thought, maybe perhaps they were too uber violent, and I was like, I don't know.
The fast
they
films,
are, but they're also huge fun.
And I always try and say my history with them. And the first time I was dragged in inverted commas to a fast film, in that a friend of mine and I had a sort of rule that if one wanted to go and see something, the other one had to, no questions asked. And we didn't abuse that very often, but I definitely took him to one or two things that I thought he doesn't really want to see that, but I could do with the company. And his was to take me to Fast 6. And I was immediately like, well, we're 6 films in. And I remember asking...
Previously on Fast 5.
I think I asked on Twitter. Oh no, Chris Hewitt said something about the film, and I replied saying, I've not seen any of these, will I get away with this? And he said, yeah, I think you just about managed. There'll be things you don't quite get, but... And I went into it, and it was a stereotype of alpha males in the room as well. It was just everything I'm not. And I sat and watched it, and 4 days later I went and watched it again. You know, it's like... I totally accept what that series is. It's got loads of flaws, but there was a sweet spot around entries 5 to 7 that were genuinely great fun. And yeah, I think that's the thing. And I think also there's an added dimension to that, Charlie, length of film as well. This isn't quite as long as some of the films we've talked about, like Once Upon a Time in America or whatever. But certainly it was at the end of that era where some quite epic films were being put out. And a lot of people know of these films without seeing them because it's a long investment. Everybody's heard of Lawrence of Arabia. I've met relatively few non super cineasts who've seen it below a certain age. But a lot of my parents' generation may have seen it, but certainly us sort of Gen X and millennials less so, because it's very, very long. And the last time it got a sort of big popularised re-release was somewhere around the death of Peter O'Toole, which is 10 years or so ago now. So you're right. You see what you see when you see. Yeah, because
it was the anniversary, wasn't it? For so I remember it came out. They did the special re-release for the London Film Festival.
I think it might have been for its 50th.
I think that was it. And that was the complete
and it was the restoration.
+hour, restoration, complete with entr'acte and
and the overture
intermission
at the
with an
start
intermission.
and everything. It's great. It's such a great experience, and I loved every minute of it. And I need to watch it again because I own it in UHD, and I'd love to put it on and say, if you're bored, I'd never like to.
4 hours.
I never like to force anyone to watch anything. But that sort of film, I just feel like putting it on and saying, let it wash over you, and if you're bored, like, look at Facebook or something, because I love
But
this.
yeah, but at the same time, if you're watching Lawrence of Arabia, how can you be bored? It looks beautiful, sounds beautiful. You've got Peter O'Toole to look at. You've got, lots of other beautiful stars to look at. You don't be looking at your screen. So, yeah, sorry, excuse me.
So, we'll go into this sequentially in a minute. I think this is the apex so far. I can't say it's definitely the apex as in the top of, because I haven't seen the film we're going to cover next week, and I'm not even really aware of its themes. But we've got one more Leone film next week.
I feel left out. I haven't seen it either, I don't think.
I haven't seen it, so you're not going to
I haven't
be.
seen it either.
Yeah, so Charlie will have. I'm sure you've seen A Fistful of Dynamite, but
Or Duck You Sucker.
Yeah.
It's possibly, and you can explain that to us next week why it's got two different titles and stuff. But that's not unusual. But I'd love to know the genesis of that next week. But I've not seen it, and it probably, of the 5 films we've covered, is probably the least famous. I would guess fewer people have seen it. But I mean, it's somewhat well known. People know the title. They know James Coburn and stuff. But at the moment, this is like reaching a crescendo of that theme of the end of the Old West. We're never given a year. I don't think the year's that relevant. We can't anchor it to things like the Civil War like we could a couple of weeks ago. But this is the death of a way of life. And what's incredible is they know it. That these characters, more than the characters in the sort of Dollars trilogy, have self-awareness. And maybe we'll talk about that as we go through, particularly Cheyenne. And we'll talk about that as we go through. That's a major theme of the film, and I just think I just point to how beautiful it looks and sounds more than anything else, and how deliberately, carefully, and slowly, without feeling slow, it unfolds its plot points. The opening scene of this film depends when you count it to. It depends whether you count it to the bullets or Charles Bronson getting up again, but it's like 13 to 15 minutes depending on how you count it. We don't get the major plot point of Jill finding her family dead for 24 minutes. We don't even get the tease of the station until 57 minutes, and she doesn't learn what that means till something like an hour and a quarter into the film, something like that. And we're halfway through the film before we have that properly explained to her. So it's very deliberate, but it's very precise as well. So starting with this film sequentially, we start at a train station with 3 guys played by Jackie Lamb, Woody Strode, and Al Mulock. Al Mulock is the only one of the 3 I don't know. And let's get the sad bit out of the way. He was dead before this film was released.
He committed suicide.
He committed suicide wearing the very outfit you're seeing him in here. He died on the set of this film. Jumped from a building. Woody Strode is married to the Native American woman at this point that we see in this scene. She's called Luana Strode, something like that. And Jackie Lamb, who would have been in his, I'm just thinking now, probably late 40s at this point, is a well-known star of a lot of things. But a lot of our fans have seen The Cannonball Run, and he was in that. Can't remember if it's the first or second one. He's the doctor. It is the first one. They've got
first one, yeah.
It's the first one. They're in the ambulance, isn't it?
Yeah.
The first one is the stronger one. Again, if you don't like the humour, you won't like either of them. But if you like them, the first one's the better one.
Which one's Roger Moore in?
The first one. The first one.
And does one have Jackie Chan and Richard Pryor?
I think I have seen it, yeah. It's got Roger in it. I think I have seen it.
That's the first one too.
Okay.
Jamie Farr, who was Klinger in MASH, is in both of them, I think.
Is that basically like the crazy, like the car race?
Yeah. I
think I have seen the first one.
The technology kitted out Mitsubishi is the first one. The them as ambulance drivers is the first one. The second one is the nuns, Shirley MacLaine, I think. And it's also got the driving orangutan. That's the second one.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. I know I haven't seen
some
that.
of it are repeats, because in the first one you got, is it Adrienne Barbeau and what's the woman called? Is it Marilu Henner?
Yeah. No, she's in the second one. Is it
Right.
Susan Summers?
Right, it's basically the same joke though. Two women in tight-fitting jumpsuits who can turn down the zip to show a bit of cleavage to get themselves out of tickets. It's the same joke in both films, but two different
Causes a
women.
distraction.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Although they do it right in front of a female police officer, and that's Valérie Perrine.
Yeah.
I was watching Superman last night.
Because it's had its anniversary re-release in cinemas this week,
I was
hasn't
going
it?
to see it in cinemas, but I've done a load of travelling in the last week or so, and I've come down with like a sore throat, and I've trained too hard, and I just think I'm burnt out, so I left it and watched it at home.
Oh.
Valérie Perrine is suffering with Parkinson's now.
Oh
sadly.
no!
Yeah.
Lives with Parkinson's.
So, again, apologies if I step on any fun facts. I'm bound to, I think, but the commentaries imply.
No, it's fine. I'm actually compiling.
All right.
Facts.
The commentary fact I heard, and it was never confirmed as factual, but Leone wanted this to be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He wanted the opening scene of the film to be the shock that you set up 10 minutes of Clint Eastwood, Eli Wallach, Lee Van Cleef planning this little sort of incident that we're not quite sure what it's going to be, only for them to be killed. And I don't know if they couldn't get them, couldn't afford them, or what. Do you, Charlie? Do you know that story?
Yeah. I think it was just that they didn't want to do
Simple as that.
such kind of small roles, as far as I was aware.
Yeah.
Was it mostly down to Eastwood? Because I know I've read Eastwood was kind of done with Leone at that point, because I think he just got fed up, but he also I don't think he wanted to like come back and do. He wanted to move on to something else, I think. So I imagine it was more down to like, if Eastwood's not going to do it, everything else just kind of fell down.
I think he originally wanted Eastwood to do the harmonica role.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense because it's an Eastwood character, isn't it?
Yeah.
But oddly enough, I can't see Eastwood playing. I mean, maybe it's because after seeing Bronson do it, but I can't see Eastwood doing that role.
They have different qualities. I think we talked about this during the Dollar Trilogy. For me, and only for me, Clint always looks vaguely amused by what's going on around him, and Charles Bronson looks like he's carved out of granite. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I found he was 15 years younger than Henry Fonda, because they both look like they've been sort of carved from marble and then sort of tanned with leather or something. It's just
they both look like they've lived out their days in the desert, haven't they? Really? Yeah, as you say, they're both.
Bronson looks hard.
Tanned.
The only other thing I'd just say at this point, although it's not in this scene, and I've forgotten the observation, but I noticed what they were observing. Only once does he appear left from shot. He glides into shot from the right several times, and you see it, and there's a reason for it, and I don't know what that reason is. But he's pretty much playing the Clint role, but he's playing it very, very differently. Is that fair?
Well, he's another one. He's another man with no name, isn't he? He's like.
I thought about this because I think he's still playing like this kind of almost like this angel of vengeance kind of thing, or kind of this.
You could replace one with the other quite easily.
He comes into town, no one really knows who he is, though he does have like a backstory. But I think the main difference I had with Bronson, this, and say Eastwood and the others is. Bronson here has a clear mission, is like a mission of vengeance. Essentially, his eyes are fixed on Frank. Like I'm out to get him. That's what I'm here to do. Whereas Eastwood is a bit more like I don't know.
Jobbing pro.
Yeah,
He's actually more
not,
like Lee Van Cleef's character last time out.
Yeah. He's not. Yeah.
Not character, but mission.
I'm trying to articulate what the correct way to put Eastwood is, but Eastwood's a bit more neutral. Like he's like he doesn't really have any personal preference about what goes on.
Ironically,
he'll deal out justice in what it is, but he doesn't really have like a personal stake. Whereas,
ironically, from with my relative lack of reference points, I keep referencing the same thing. But although they're effectively the man with no name, both of them, Bronson's mission is more like, is much more like Lee Van Cleef's in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, whereas Sonny, was it? The man with no name's character in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was much more like Sabata, which is a Lee Van Cleef character, in terms of doing the right things for not necessarily the right reasons.
I mean, that's probably a better thing, but in terms of like the kind of almost like this like spirit of vengeance kind of thing, it like to have it more of a modern reference point. It kind of a little bit like Brandon Lee and the Crow, just this kind of like this mysterious like.
But Brandon Lee is just a vessel, really. Yeah.
But like you kind of get that. He still has that kind of quality. Like he just kind of comes in and then leaves. But what I was going to say, the only time where I think I can see Eastwood in that role is the bit where he is kind of helping Frank. You know, like kind of toying with him.
Yeah.
You know, like sort of standing on the. You know, that's the only time I can see Eastwood doing that scene.
Yeah.
But other than that, I kind of I think.
But what I love about this opening sequence, so just to put it in context, they're there to meet somebody off a train and kill them. I do have the side point that we can answer later, that given Frank doesn't know who Harmonica is, do they know they're there to kill Harmonica, or are they there just to kill whoever gets off that train in order to frame Cheyenne and sort of water down anyone who might want Jill's place, the McBain farm? So that's an open question that we can address if you like. But they're there basically to kill someone, and it's just 11 or 12 minutes before the train even pulls in of just these noises, an annoying drop of water, a fly, and this sort of windmill, and it's great. It's like a windmill pump, isn't it? And we had a different director last week. We know we're back to Leone because we're straight into these sun-drenched, leathery close-ups of faces, but with a wide-angle lens. It's amazing.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's one of the best cinematography ever. I mean, like Charlie posted this on Facebook. You know, it's basically like a sort of filmmaking class in itself. And it's like, you're right, it really is. There's like, if you want to know how to frame your shots, watch this film. If you want to know how to introduce characters, watch this film. If you want to know how to edit very tense shootouts, watch this film. If you want to learn about how to cast
absolutely,
watch this film. How to cast against type, watch this film. I wonder on the fact that Bronson's character just kind of like I think this is probably like the third Charles Bronson film I've seen. I need to see more of his movies because he's quite prolific.
But like Christopher Lee, a bit like Christopher Lee, the quality's absolutely all over the place, though. But there are some. But like Christopher Lee, there's some absolute stunners in there. Believe me.
Yeah, there's some rough with this move. Yeah. I've seen three quite decent ones.
And also he's like, he is a star. Like I just always draws to him, no matter what.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I kind of feel like you sort of trying to describe the look that he's got here in this film. That's kind of like the image I have of him like throughout all of his films. I know that's literally tarring with the same brush, but he kind of just has the same. Like, I don't mean this as a criticism at all, because it's like sort of iconic image. He sort of has like the same sort of look about him. He's sort of really quite inscrutable, sort of like very tough, as weather beaten, quite formidable as well. You come up against him, and you're gonna know about it. But yeah, just the way that it's just sort of framed as well, where he just kind of you don't really see him come or go. He just appears, and then he doesn't.
He just glides in from the side of the
He just sort
shot.
of I think Chris has got a point there. He's just like sort of avenging angel, almost a kind of otherworldly type character. Or perhaps he's there, he's got his own mission. Perhaps you don't always know what it is. But so he's just kind of hell-bent, sort of eventually against Frank. Definitely.
We don't even see the first flashback. I've forgotten the timestamp now, but it's well over an hour. I don't know if it's 102 or 112 or something like that. We don't even see the beginning of the first flashback to that until then. The film unloads quite slowly, but it's given you a lot of clues all the way through. Not this scene particularly, although you do find they're dressed like Cheyenne's crew. But it's a bit like when she looks at the station later. I thought that was giving it away, but it's actually about half hour later she works out what that meant. And so on. But yeah, so we've got all this build up following in a quick shootout. All four of them are hit, but Harmonica's only hit in like the arm. He's just not too badly hurt.
And most conventional sense, it would be like Harmonica doesn't have a scratch. In most conventional senses, but here he's wounded.
He is wounded, and I just unfortunately only, and this is the one limiting factor on bonus features and stuff. There was a lot of interesting ideas about the film, but they're just that, ideas, for the simple reason. By then, Leone had been dead, whatever it had been, 15 years or whatever. I think he died in the late 80s, and he's not there to ask. So if he'd not already said it, we don't know. And I would love to pick his brains on how his conception of what he was trying to achieve with these films changed from the Dollars trilogy, because the characters are quite a lot different, even though there's some of the same sort of archetypes. But then we cut to you would call it a farm simply because he's been we see here later in the film he spent years tilling worthless soil or worthless sand. Well, tilling is land preparation, so that's basically a farm. McBain, where did we see Frank Wolf before, Charlie?
He was the sheriff in The Great Silence.
I knew we had, but I couldn't remember where. He was the one that is characterised as incompetent, but is actually pretty good.
Yeah, and Al Mulock, who you mentioned earlier, was the one-armed guy in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that tried to kill Tuco.
Oh, all right. Okay, no, I couldn't place him. Although his face looked recognisable, but it looked recognisable in being like a Sergio Leone Western shot more than anything else. And I didn't think, what have I seen him in? I was thinking, I recognise that face. So this is a family. It's a father and 3 children, is it?
Yeah.
An older boy, a younger boy, and a daughter. Daughter's nearly grown up. One of the sons is nearly grown up. The other one's a bit younger. And some of the details don't really matter here, although I'm interested in how it came about. This relatively poor farmer, and he's bought what's considered worthless farm. This is all speculation to accumulate, as we find out. Their mother died 6 years ago, we're told, because at one point the eldest son says, my mother died 6 years ago, and he said, I've got to go and meet your mother. He's about to go to the town of, what the hell is it called? Flagstone. They've got to go to the town of Flagstone to pick up his intended, we think at this stage. Spoiler alert, we later find out they're already married. And it's a young woman he's met in New Orleans. And I don't know how this man ended up in New Orleans, much less married. The implication is she was at some point a sex worker. That does seem to have been the implication through the film. She does make references to men just using her. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think they do say that she was. I forget which time line down, but I'm sure they mention it.
Frank
specifically.
Frank said, because Frank said he spoke to someone in New Orleans. He sent a telegram.
Okay, all right. So Frank knows this woman's coming. All right, okay. So they're about to go into town. So he's about to marry. As I say, we'll find out in a while. He was married a month ago. That really doesn't matter. The only plot relevance to that is she inherits the land because they're already married. If she turned up due to marry that afternoon, she'd have got nothing. So I guess that's one of the reasons they were trying to do that, kill him off. So, at this point, Henry Fonda appears with his men from the desert. Now, apparently, when Henry Fonda turned up on set, he was wearing facial hair and brown contact lenses. Because he thought his eyes and the fact he was Henry Fonda and a good guy, a Jimmy Stewart type, not in, well, I suppose in real life to some degree, because they were both conservatives in real life, were going to, was going to be a distraction, and Leone said, no, I want the baby blues, that's what I hired. He wanted the piercing eyes, and he wanted people to go, oh my Christ, that's Henry Fonda. And he basically kills them all. He nearly lets the younger boy off, but one of his sidekicks says his name, and he's like, well, I can't now. So she arrives in town, Jill, that day, and no one's there to pick her up. Except Dr. Emmett Brown. No, the picking her up, and the
Great
shot...
Scott.
Well, the shot that goes up and over the station at Flagstone is copied in Back to the Future Part 3 deliberately.
And Lord of the Rings as well.
Where in Lord of the Rings? Oh, yes, of course, sorry. Don't answer that, I know exactly where.
We'll do that when we come to it.
Right. Okay. So, she gets to Sweetwater. She's taken a sort of carriage in. We get a bit of exposition. Only in as much as, this is worthless land. Sweetwater, bloody hell, there's nothing there. Why the hell is he trying to farm that? And the film is hinting at everything. At the same time, we're passing road workers, so the train tracks are basically spreading across America at this point. And we stop at, they stop for a drink. And they meet Max from Heart to Heart, which is odd. Because, A, it's a period piece, which would also have an effect, but B, the 70s just feels such a different era. It's only 10 years apart. And this is where we meet Cheyenne, and we meet harmonica again. Cheyenne is shackled, and this bit of the film gives us so much information in about 12 minutes. We find out that Cheyenne is thought to have committed these murders at the McBain farm, yeah?
Yeah, so...
And they think it's his men because of the dusters they were wearing that had turned up to try and kill harmonica at the train station.
Yeah. Which would have made a bit of sense of initially wanting to leave the kid alive. So it's like, well, the witness of men in dusters, so it's got to be Cheyenne. And with them mentioning his name, Frank, it was like, well, you just fucking ruined that now, haven't you?
Yeah, brilliant, yeah.
Yeah. So
Cheyenne definitely doesn't work with a guy called Frank. They're very different crews. So Cheyenne's now annoyed, and he gets to get someone there to shoot him out of his shackles, so he's now free. And Jill arrives at Sweetwater to find basically wedding guests, because they were supposed to marry immediately, and they're all laid out dead. And she said, well, we were actually married anyway, so now we find the torn off collar of a duster overcoat. That's what it is. So they now think that's Cheyenne's work. And she says, they're offering to take her home. They're just like, well, that didn't work out. We'll take you back. She says, no, I'm staying here.
Is this when we meet Morton? And he tells off Frank for killing everyone.
Morton is... How can we describe Morton for anyone who hasn't seen the film? Basically, it's Gabriel Fawcetti, who we've talked about more than once as Tracy's father in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. His voice was dubbed in both films and not by the same person, so he sounds very different here. Of course, in my head, Gabriel Fawcetti sounds like that, but there you go.
Yeah. It's hard to think about it.
He sounds how he sounds in Majesty's to me. I don't actually know. I don't, because he was in the 90s adaptation of Othello by Ken Branagh. I think he played the Duke. And he appears right at the very start of the film. The start of the film, because they've done the scenes around. But I don't know if he was dubbed for that film, because I just suddenly heard, obviously he was dubbed here, dubbed in Majesty's. There's only one of three films. I've only seen 3 Bronson films. I've only seen 3 Fazzetti films.
Can you tell the difference, Becca, between here and Majesty's? It's not the same voice, is it?
Yeah, no, it's a different.
Well, I know,
it's not Robert
I know
Ricci.
for a fact, but I'm saying, did you notice it was different?
Yeah, it did sound different. I was like, it's not the same man dubbing him. But I don't think in Othello, the other film I've seen, and I don't suspect he's dubbed there. It's obviously a more modern movie. I don't think he's dubbed there either. But I suddenly thought, I don't actually know what he really sounds like, because I've only seen these 3 films. And
you'll be able to find footage of him talking in his native tongue somewhere, I would have thought.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an interview with him in his native language. I'll have to look it up.
Where do we go from here? Yeah, so Morton is basically a businessman stroke crime boss living on a train with his name inscribed on it. And it just travels around. He's walking in the sort of braces that people with rickets used to wear, but it's described as, what is the illness described of? Tuberculosis of the spine, which I'd never even heard of. Well, I clearly have, because I've seen this film, but I'd no memory of it. If you'd said to me what's up with his character a week ago when I hadn't seen the film for a while, I'd have said, oh, he's got rickets or something. So he's not a well man, and he knows that he wants that land. Because there's effectively, I don't know that it's the same way we'd understand it now, but we find out through the film, we find out quite late on from Harmonica, so sorry for jumping around a bit, but he explains that there's planning permission on that land for all these different houses. Not houses, but like a station, shops, this building, that building, to build a small town. Yeah. It's to build a small town. It's 320 acres. We're told that a bit later on. But the rule is it all has to be up by the time the railroad arrives. The station has to be anyway. Otherwise, the ownership of the land will revert back. So they're trying to basically get him out of the way, stop him building anything, so terrorise him a bit, if not kill him, and certainly interrupt any possible wedding, so that if anything does happen to him, it's just not going to pass to another problem. And we'll find out why. Well, we find out later. I've kind of spoiled it there, but the point is, it's the coming of the railroad, and they are a source of water. There's a well there, so it is perfectly. When it's in the middle of nowhere, it's a source of water. That's fine. But once it's a railroad, it isn't a source of. It's a source of water, and it's now a town. So they're going to be very, very wealthy. And he sort of says that. Harmonica does find out that it was one of Frank's men, that it was Frank, who he claims it was Cheyenne to start with, who tried to shoot him, and he said, look, that's Frank's thing. He fakes evidence. At the same time, Morton is telling Frank, we didn't want all that bloodshed. So that's what we are. And at the same time, we're coming up to about the hour mark now. Jill sort of finds these miniature buildings stored away. She's looking to see if there's anything of worth there, because she's got no work of anything. And she finds a model train station. But that doesn't really mean anything. This guy might have been a bit like people getting model trains now. It might just have been a hobby of his. Because I've seen the film, I thought she twigged it all then, but she hasn't. And that's Harmonica turning up. And he's just watching, but it's the next day Cheyenne turns up. And he turns up and demands coffee. And this film has a fair bit of tension in it if you've not seen it, because we don't know his intentions. He gets quite close to her physically a few times. She's quite brave here, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think she is throughout the whole film. He's a strong character.
And he just sort of says, it wasn't me. I wouldn't kill kids. I'm not what people make out. He looks at he actually walks around the place, and this is where I'm meant to have killed all these folks, is it? But they don't understand why it happened. He doesn't understand why someone's trying to frame him. McBain, or Mrs. McBain as she is now, Jill has no idea. And it's like, well, he must have had something here of worth. And of course, she's just searched everywhere, so she knows that's not the case. And then we get the Gabriel Fazzetti thing, and then Frank was there to just remove obstacles. Morton was going to have the railroad in sight, and he wanted to build his way through, and he wanted the towns on the way to make money. Frank at the same time decides to sort of take it for himself. So Morton and Frank don't have a particularly trustworthy relationship.
No, because what happens later on is, and it's kind of a bit echoed in the scene the first scene they had together, because there's a bit where like Frank sits in his chair, and he talks about like I forgot what the particular line of dialogue, but there's kind of like, oh, how's it feel? It's like, like sort of sitting behind a desk. It's like, oh, it's like holding a gun. It's a same kind of thing.
There is a strange sequence, because one of the sequences where he's telling him off for killing the people takes place outside, and that's totally in continuity error with the rest of the film. It's in a logical place, but we've already seen Frank turn up somewhere else.
Yeah.
At the same time, and I think it's when he turns up to Jill, and on the commentary they couldn't understand why the scene was cut there, almost like it had been a mistake. But because Frank does turn up to see her later. Is it implied Jill and Cheyenne have sex? I can't remember. I've read it in a plot synopsis. They did. Did I turn away at the wrong time?
I don't think they did. I don't remember that.
No.
I did wonder about whether they'd actually end up being together. Oddly,
they looked quite a mix, and she wants somebody. She does want somebody. She says something near the end that we'll come back to, that she would have taken either of these guys later in the film as her husband. I mean, I don't mean anything else. Now, Harmonica comes in at this point and sort of starts ripping at her clothes, but it's not a rape thing. Is he looking for wealth? What is he? What's he doing? Why is he ripping bits off her clothes?
I think it's because it's because of the men outside. I'm sure it's something like that. He sends her outside, so they think.
Is it to do with her being in mourning?
I think it's like to make her look like someone's already there.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, because it is to a Frank guys. Harmonica kills them.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm not.
So immediately, these two guys who are quite rough have actually they're sort of looking out for her. They're sort of looking out for themselves, and there is kind of almost a theme of potential domestication there, possibly. Again, the end of the Old West. There's a life there if either of them want it, but is it them? Can they actually go that way? This is where. Are we coming up towards the sale or not? Is that not yet?
No, because
Harmonica goes to find one of the guys who was at the funeral.
Yeah.
And who's Frank, and tells him to go and tell Frank that he wants to meet him, and then he follows him.
Where does that meeting take place? Where do we go from there? Oh, Frank captures Harmonica later, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's where we get the first flashback, but it's nothing. We just see like an indistinct blur of a man walking. And that will sharpen up and show to be a much younger Frank. Frank as a young man. It is
younger, dishevelled.
Yeah, I mean it's still Henry Fonda, who's getting on a bit older by now, but yeah. By now he would have been in his early 50s. Frank gets him onto the train, kicks the guy that spoke to Harmonica off it, and shoots him because he's about to reveal Cheyenne's underneath the train.
Yeah.
Harmonica tells Frank that the guys he sent to kill Jed are themselves dead. And then so Frank is starting to go, "Who are you?" And I love this. He just starts giving him the name of people Frank's killed in the past. He said, "Well, it's not him. He's dead." He doesn't know who he is, and it's clearly disturbing him.
Yeah, but it kind of teases us, the audience, as well, because obviously it sort of underlines the mystery while antagonising Frank. But Frank, like us, I don't want to just kill this guy. I want to know who he is first. It's like. It'll give him this mystery. It'll bug him. It's like, right, well, I've got to know.
Yeah.
Who the fuck are you?
Yeah, that's where Frank. Morton, I think, interrupts and basically says we got important things to deal with. Sends him off to Jill. And Harmonica's just kept on the train. And this is the one bit when it happened I nearly messaged Charlie because I thought you might be watching this with kid because he does take advantage of Jill. It's not rape, but it's only not rape because she knows not to get too she knows not to protest too much at this stage. It's too her future safety is too in the balance, so she goes along with it. But you can see she's uncomfortable. The acting in this film's terrific all the way through.
So Cheyenne kills the other guards on the train.
So they've now got Morton, and they'll sort with that later. They now have him. He's got no one to protect him, and he's very, very unwell anyway.
Yeah.
So they ride to sort of Jill. And Jill is wondering why an absolute load of building supplies have turned up. And it's been paid by cash, ordered by her late husband. And no one knows what it's for, but there's enough materials to build like 8 buildings. And then there's a blank sign, but it's the exact same shape as the miniature one on the station. So she now starts realising that was his vision to build something here. We still don't know the full story. Harmonica went and had a look. He went into the town and looked at all the paperwork on it, and just said, "Well, this was what happened." Morton just wants to buy Sweetwater and just get rid of all this sort of killing and stuff. But yeah, so she doesn't know what to do. She's clearly starting to sort of think she's had Frank intimidating her. She knows that they're going to go hard for it now because there's money in it, but she's not quite sure how and why yet. That's got us up to date so far. Do we get? We must be getting to the sales bit soon.
Yeah, we're pretty much there because she's under duress.
That's it. He explains it first. He says, "Look, I've seen the document. McBain was going to build this town. It has a water supply here, and there isn't one. Sweetwater itself was a clue as a name. He does say the mileage. I have got like a summary here. It's 50 miles until they get another natural water source. So he got the right to sort of build this train depot himself, but he would only keep those rights as long as it was built by the time the track reached it. So Cheyenne basically gets all his men to start building.
Meanwhile, Henry Fonda, Frank, has found the little station thing that she was looking for.
That's it. She goes looking for it after she's seen about all these buildings, and he's there holding it, and that's where he does end up having sex with her. And I think he just sort of realises. She just realises. I think I've just got to sell it to him because his only modus otherwise is violence, and I've just slept with him, which may spare my life if I just say have it.
Yeah.
So they go for an auction, and Frank's men are there just to basically intimidate anyone out of bidding, because this is probably worth thousands. This probably answers our question about the bounties in the earlier films, because the first decent bid later on is going to be a little bit more than the sort of bounties we were getting in the earlier films, and that's for 320 acres of land on water with a railroad coming through. So, yeah, the sheriff, Keenan Wynn. Point about Keenan Wynn, Charlie might know this. Keenan Wynn, I was sat watching him and I thought, I recognise that guy. Now, I probably recognise him from things he was in, but I recognise him from one thing he was not in either. Watching Superman last night, he was meant to play Perry White. But he had a heart attack just before they went to London to film. And Richard Donner called up Jackie Cooper and said, "Do you have a passport?" He said, "I'm about to ask you a question. If the answer's no, the call's over." He said, "Do you have a passport?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Go to the airport now." And basically he took over at last minute. Keenan Wynn was meant to be Perry White, but he's actually just here to run the auction. Frank knows from inquiries of line I'm reading here, most of the popular prostitutes. Yeah. So yes, he did know. So where do we go from there? This is where Cheyenne and Harmonica come to her aid.
So So Cheyenne got a $5,000 bounty on his head, and so he comes in at gunpoint with harmonica, who says he's gonna take the bounty and buy the land.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee Cheyenne will get free. Do you know what I mean? They all know their lifestyle's coming to an end, and they're risking their lives for something and someone better than them in their perception. First mention of humour as well. New modern prison. If you looked into that enough, you could probably date this film. But obviously we're going to not see him break himself free and head towards Morton's train afterwards. I think Jill's starting to get ideas about harmonica at this point because he's done something so nice in saving the farm. And then this is the whole section of harmonica toying with Frank.
Yeah.
I love this sequence. Can we just sort of explain what happens then, folks? How would we describe this scene to someone who hasn't seen it?
So it's the usual thing where you've got someone walking through the town and you've got a lot of men around hiding in places with guns ready to ambush them. But it's Frank's men who are there to ambush him because they've been paid off by Morton to kill him.
And harmonica is there just picking
Helping
them off.
along.
And Jill is right behind him, furious, because he's in the bath at this point. She just wants to scrub herself clean after everything. And she just says, like, why didn't you kill him? It's like, me stopping them killing him is not the same thing as, saving him. In other words, I'm doing it.
He's mine.
He's mine. Absolutely, he's mine. And I love that. I think that's really, really smart.
Frank then goes to the train with Morton.
We're final act now. Morton is lying, dying. Basically, all of his men are dead. And Morton's crawling towards a puddle, basically.
Yeah, it's like that sort of purpose he gets to water, really. So we get a scene where he's like staring at a picture. He's got a picture of waves, the ocean.
What's that about?
I think I always interpret that was like what he ultimately wanted to.
Oh, he wanted to build to the coast, didn't he?
Yeah.
And he thought, well, my last thing is to get to any water, a puddle. All right. Okay. Yeah, Frank's about to finish him off, but I think he realises he's in his death throes anyway, so he dies. What's happened here will echo back towards the end of the film. And the tracker getting towards Sweetwater, the construction to a building the town. Harmonica's just sat there waiting. Cheyenne comes in. Now, the only thing I had noticed, Cheyenne doesn't look right. We don't know why. Once you've seen the film, it's kind of obvious. But he's a bit sweaty and he's blinking a bit slowly. He looks like he's in some pain, but it's not as. Yeah. It's a bit more subtle than just grabbing his side or something.
Yeah.
He goes on. He asks for coffee. And then Frank rides up. And they basically do say that we're being overtaken by events, by time, by the new world, by the modern age. And so they go off to have a duel. Frank still doesn't know who he is. But just as they're about to duel, with that incredible music, we get the full flashback.
Yeah.
Frank.
So he asks him again, he's sort of like, only in death or only like, only his like last breath draws or something like that. It basically implying like, basically when you're about to die.
Yeah.
Or when I'm about to die, possibly, but yeah. Yeah, so then we get the full flashback.
Well, I just wanted to say something before we go to the flashback. We see a little bit of Cheyenne inside the house, and it echoes an earlier sequence when Charles Bronson spent some time with her at her home earlier. You almost felt him starting to enjoy the domesticity just before he started. Cheyenne's enjoying it here. Cheyenne is like, I could have had something like this. Okay, so they square up. What's the...
He's getting sentimental about his mother as well. Like, you know, it's like coffee like my mum made.
Yeah, and he said basically she was in the same line of work as you, and she was the finest woman I ever met. Whoever my father was, what a lucky man. Yeah. Yeah, so the flashback is harmonica had an older brother. Strangely, despite Charles Bronson being of Lithuanian descent, he's now like Mexican or something. But he's got his brother, an older boy, so if he's 14, his brother's 18, let's say. If I'm wildly wrong with that, correct me. He's sat on his shoulders with a noose around his neck hanging from something, and only the young harmonica is holding him up. And he's exhausted. They've obviously been tortured, mistreated, and Henry Fonda goes over to him, puts the harmonica in his mouth and says something about entertain your brother. And eventually he knows that when he finally collapses to the ground, his brother will die because his hands are bound. He can't get free of this. And so at the point of death, because obviously the shootout harmonica does get the better of him, he puts the harmonica in his mouth.
I just love how the music just like sort of builds, and it's and like literally it's from the moment the flashback ends, you get the jaw, and it's just it
builds all the way through.
It hits really well. The impact makes Frank turn around, like sort of kind of spins around, and he's like almost like this kind of shocked look.
They're not normally this close together, to be fair, in these things. But I was almost more interested in inside the house, because Cheyenne says to her, he says, when he's done, he will come in, he'll grab his things and say he's got to go somewhere else. Because she says something like, you're a good man. And he says, I am, but I'm not the right man. And then she sort of looks around and she said, neither's he. You know, we don't fit with you. He didn't say any of that, but he said he's going to come in, grab his stuff and go. And he's, you know, and me too, basically. And when he sort of leaves, he says goodbye, and he just says, you got to make believe it's nothing, you just got to switch off whatever you thought of us. And I just found that that moved me somehow. Maybe it's just the way Jason Robards played it. What do you think, Becca?
Yeah, that end scene definitely. I think it's, for me, it's a little bit sort of heartbreaking. She's been through so much upheaval. It's kind of really well shot, and I think was this who's the actress? I can't remember her name.
Claudia Cardinale.
Claudia Cardinale, yeah, definitely. I must give it. Again, I'm sort of not for sci-fi. She's sort of a bit of an unknown to me. I haven't seen very many of her films, sort of thing. But she's sort of one of the few kind of really sort of powerful female characters, like throughout the sort of the selection of films that we've chosen for all the Western series. And she carries it all the way through. Like, she puts up with so much. And if she is this kind of prostitute, she's kind of got this like past towards, and she's trying to make, do the best of what she can in this frontier town, basically all on her own. And now this is how she's treated at the end of the film. We just think, oh my god, I think it's really, really kind of well done, I think.
What I like about it, I think, is that it's the one moment of overt vulnerability. Through the whole film, she's had to be stronger than you would expect, and she's done it all the way through. She's even gone through being pretty much coerced into sex by certainly one of them, possibly two.
Yeah, this is
possibly implied. And at the end of the film, she's basically saying, will one of you love me? And neither of them can. They don't have that in them.
But she doesn't do it in a way that's kind of like begging or anything. She's not like going cup in hand or anything like that. But she's been through so much.
No, she's not begging.
She's lived through so much.
Nor
trauma.
does it. It doesn't come off as any man will do either. It just comes off as you're both good men. It comes
like, no, it's not. We're not right.
Yeah.
That's what it goes like. Yeah, you deserve better.
Yeah.
We're not right.
That's kind of what I was thinking. You don't deserve us, sort of thing.
Because she's like making like this town, which is essentially like the future of what's to come there in the past. We're like,
with the
or
past,
like, or Cheyenne
future
is really. I think Bronson's
But
a
what's
bit more
more
of a
moving
spirit
about it
kind of-
is we're going to find out in a couple of minutes that Cheyenne is mortally wounded, and he kind of
Yeah.
knows it as well. And he's like, you know, in some respects, maybe it would work better if he wasn't mortally wounded, because then it would be a choice. Whereas here it is, well, he hasn't got a choice, but he knows that their time is over anyway. Just on the side, you saw her in the Pink Panther, the original. She was in that. I thought that was just Capucine, but no, she was in it as well. Yeah, sorry. As they ride off, of course, it turns out that he was mortally wounded in sort of the exchange with Morton. So he does drop down dead, but no one wants to show anyone. But he's of that generation that type of life where they're not going to show feelings. And now, in the original cut, in the cut version for the US audience to this, there was a few things cut. The two I know about is the whole sequence at the bar early in the film where Harmonica and Cheyenne meet wasn't there. So we don't see Cheyenne till he first turns up at Jill's place at Sweetwater. And secondly, they cut it after they leave. We didn't see Cheyenne die. So in the original cut, he didn't die at all. There were 3 things cut. There are the 2 of them I know about. What, Charlie, do you know what else was cut from that version?
I'm not sure.
Don't worry if you don't know. I just know that something was. And that's it. And that has covered, well, I think it's about 2 hours and 46 minutes now. And at no point did I feel even remotely impatient with it. I was just always take as long as you like.
It was
so
some of these
happy.
films, like some of them, like we get to, obviously we're coming up to doing Lord of the Rings next. They're famously very long films, especially if you do the extended editions. And likewise throughout, as long as we've been doing Do You Expect Us to Talk, we come to very short films and we come to very long films. This film is one of those that kind of wears its length really well. It kind of zips through. It's got really tense scenes, but also really long. But it's like on the chat thread that I've got, it's like my little 20-inch TV doesn't do it justice. It needs to be on the big IMAX screen that you can find. It's a long film, but it really doesn't feel like it's 2 3/4 hours. Well, to me, it doesn't anyway.
But he shoots faces so well. That's the point. That I mean, most of the time they're just like landscapes, but actually in this film you can just stand and watch them for ages, because Jill sees the bodies of her family there, effectively 3 of them she's never even met, and we linger on that for a long time, but you will find yourself sat there wondering what she's thinking and trying to read what she's thinking, and there's no hurry. There's just no hurry with it at all. It's all beautifully scored at the same time anyway. I think that's really just my final thoughts on it. I don't need to say a lot more. Not many films, lots of films have moved me in that I've gone and cried at a lot of films. I never cried at this, and I've never felt emotionally moved in a strange way, but it just gives me a unique feeling. There's no other Western that feels quite like it, even though it's still got the same almost man with no name character, revenge arc, end of the Old West. It's got all that. It's got the shootout at the end, but it feels different than any of the rest of them. And it's beautifully acted, which when you think not everyone is even speaking English, some of it's dubbed and everything else, it actually feels very naturalistic. We've got characters that are reflecting in a way they didn't in the early films. They turn up and do their things. Well, Cheyenne is reflecting on his life and the end of a way of living. Frank even kind of knows he's beaten at the end. And I think Harmonica knows this is me until the end. I'm not even going to stop and think about this. This is me till the end. I'll just keep going. I know my time's over, so I'll just keep moving. I'll try and stay ahead of the railroad, if you like. Maybe that's it. Eventually he'll meet the coast and it will catch up with him, and that'll be the end of that. Beautifully shot, beautiful sounding, and just comfortable enough in its own skin to not just go, we best have another action sequence now. There's no hurry, there's relatively little action in it, and when they do it, it's beautiful and it's witty. Just him going, just past 12, and it's because there's a clock above him and stuff like that, and someone about to shoot him. We mustn't underestimate. There's only been a few like it where you get a good guy playing a bad guy. I suppose you could think Robin Williams in 1 Hour Photo. You could probably say what's the film called? Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks. But there probably isn't the same impact as a Henry Fonda. It is like a Jimmy Stewart playing a bad guy. Maybe when Jimmy...
What impact did it have on the rest of his career, though? I mean, because you can sort of look at other characters who were other sort of actors of that kind of generation who may have been cast, certain. I mean, there's a couple that spring to mind, but they don't really fit in with this genre. But
well,
I don't know what impact this had on Henry Fonda's career at this stage in his career. Obviously, he had many great roles.
The vast majority of his career was behind him at this point, but I'm trying to see what accolades it won. Let me just look. I'm just checking something. Yes, he won. He did. He won Best Actor for On Golden Pond.
Yeah.
So he won the Academy Award for his final film. Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, he died quite recently. I didn't realise. Well, 82.
Well, you probably thought it was a bit. I thought he died in 75 or 76. I think I was getting confused with Bing Crosby or something.
No, On Golden Pond. That was a big Oscar-winning film.
There was a lot of emotion in that film because he had a difficult relationship with his own children, and that film dealt with it by proxy.
Yeah.
It's got Katharine Hepburn in it as well, who won an Oscar.
Great cast.
It's a hell of a film. But anyway, I've never seen.
What sort of effect that had,
when Tom Hanks did it, it didn't. It was okay. When Robin Williams did it, it was kind of creepy. But
yes, he had a run of like 3 films where he played sort of villainous or darker characters.
Yeah, because he did the remake of Insomnia at the same time.
1 Hour Photo and Death to Smoochy, which I've not seen.
I think it's a lot more subtle villain performance in Insomnia. Well.
It is, yeah. It's a bit kind of mysterious, isn't it? Kind of didn't.
I forgot about Insomnia, to be fair.
Well, no, he definitely did.
Yeah, no, he did. But it's some of those, to begin with, it's like, but then he did.
But you look at sort of Henry Fonda. There's an awful lot of his stuff I've not seen, but I've certainly seen 12 Angry Men and a few other things like that. Anyone listening who's not seen 12 Angry Men, it is as good as that. And if there's a stage play version coming near you, go see that too, because it is perfect for the stage. That piece of work. And when you see who wrote it, it's obvious why.
Yeah.
But anyway, I can imagine the first time you see Henry Fonda as a cold-blooded killer, that must have had a big impact on cinema.
Must have been quite a shock. Oh my God.
Yeah, everybody's wonderful in it.
And he does it so well, unfortunately.
There's a sadness in it. When people say the film has something to do with death, they're absolutely right. And it isn't that everyone dies. It's that a way of life is dying, and people's hopes and dreams die as well. But it ends on a hope and a town that, if it were real, will still be standing today in some modern incarnation. She was the future, they were the past, and whatever her life had been before, this film doesn't judge either, which is a nice change from the sort of American Puritanism of sort of the Western era. So that's it from me. Yeah,
it doesn't really kind of she's not damned if she does, damned if she doesn't, really, isn't she? So she's just, the sort of character living out her life, but she's just had it incredibly tough. And she's, trying to make a life for herself along the railroad, the new frontier kind of being created around her, and she's going to be a part of it. So
yeah, I just think it's all beautifully done. Like the music is just fantastic. It's probably one of Picconi's best, and it just all works so well. I mean, I agree with Dave that it has all the classic Western tropes that you want. It's probably got the best duel and the best payoff, one of the best payoffs. With its reveal and how it does it is just almost like note perfect. But it's not your typical. Again, it's not your typical Western. It's the story, isn't like your typical Western story with with a lone gunslinger riding into town and doing whatever. There's a bit more to it than that, and it takes its time, but yet at the same time the story itself is quite simple. You could probably tell this story in 90 minutes. But obviously without the...
I inherently knew it wouldn't be an epically long podcast because it's quite a smooth story to tell.
Yeah, it's just his style. Like the scenes, just he just takes his time with the scenes, and that's just the that's just his way of doing it, but it doesn't feel like drawn out anyway. So yeah, it is again, it is probably still my favourite Western.
We've still got a couple of weeks left to test that.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, you can see the kind of the where this is kind of like the next level of what he was doing previously, and especially where with the Civil War and everything, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, what he was trying to say about everything ending, and in here it is ending literally, and that's why it's part of his second, well, what they call trilogy or whatever, unofficial films with Ducky Sucker, which is set in 1913. And it is.
I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew it was that late. I've not really looked at it yet at all.
Yeah, and because James Coburn plays someone from the IRA.
The original IRA, yeah.
Yeah, the Irish Republic.
Well, it's just bear in mind when people think of the IRA, they think of the Troubles, and that was the provisional IRA, which is was started as a splinter group.
Yeah. So much more then. It's about the Mexican Revolution and that kind of thing. And then Once Upon a Time in America is where the Western, the cowboys are replaced with gangsters.
Available on Disney Plus.
Yep. So it's kind of, yes, it's shifted down to
I didn't know that. I'll be able to add that to my watch list. Oh my gosh.
It's either on Netflix or Amazon Prime as well, I'm not sure, but I know it's definitely on Disney Plus. I will find the answer to the other one in a minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's kind of almost closing the chapter on the Western. And that's the way so much of this film as well is almost a kind of like a greatest hits of Westerns as well. So it's like a love letter to the Western. So you've got the railroad, you've got the vengeful cowboy, and you've got as well the kind of the things like Monument Valley and that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of that's kind of really Leone kind of saying how much he loves John Ford.
Oh yeah, I mean this was shot in Spain, Italy, and Utah.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the film where I think it might be one of the bar scenes where the door opens and a load of like sand comes in the door, and they said on the commentary that they shot that in like Cinecittà Studios in Italy or something, but took the sand from like Utah Monument Valley, so it was consistent.
That's surprising. I mean, in that way, it's kind of, it almost is like a forerunner of what Tarantino does, only in a much more or less obvious way. And Morricone's score is just incredible, and the way he uses those three motifs, and he's got harmonica with his own motif.
Yeah, I mean, harmonica's got one. I mean, the best way to describe it is the most comedic is Cheyenne's. It's almost like a bandy-legged horse or something.
Yeah.
That's what it evokes.
Always visually like a donkey guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't know where it's going to go either.
No, because it could be anything. It could be a right wretched human being at the same time as being kind of funny. Yeah. Jill's is just gorgeous.
Yeah. And you've got the one for
and it's appropriate as well in that it's by far the lushest and most, in some places, romantic score, and you think, we're actually finally softening the people of this world anyway. They're still hard men, but they're reflecting and thinking. They've softened a little bit from the sort of lantern jaw earlier. They weren't really lantern jawed, they were flawed, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They were a lot more straightforward in the earlier films, and so was the score, as iconic as they were.
And you've got Frank, and his theme is almost like heavy metal. With that kind of really kind of rough guitar riff.
Yeah, it is.
And it's where kind of the choir is on it as well, especially when you see him kill.
But strangely, it's like, it's not similar, but sometimes if you watch a Hitchcock film, the score almost like spirals and goes around in circles, and it's got a hint of that, but it's like a slower version.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of the kind of jaggedness. It's very much for Frank and harmonica as well, for those characters.
Oh, and the two bits merge together really well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In fact, I normally hear them both together in my head anyway.
Yeah.
But the score is fantastic. I've had several versions of it. I've played it. My wife walked down the aisle to me to some of it. It's a very special film to me, and it's the one thing it's got in common with The Graduate, which I think was the year before, is that they would probably stand as the two films on my favourite film list, if you like, that I've seen least, because I've probably only seen both of them 4 times maybe, because they don't need, I don't know, some films you think, I could live watching. I've bought DVDs of films in years gone by. I think I'll be watching this all the time. You never do in the end.
Yeah.
But with this, I don't feel that, and I've never felt it. With some things, like there are Bond films I love and I want to watch a lot, and there's Bond films I love that I don't need very often.
Yeah.
And it's a bit, but it's not like that. It's not like I don't want to watch it. It's not like it's hard work. It's just little infrequently. I don't need it very often. And when I get it, it's just this wonderful experience. It makes it almost more like an event, even though I might have thrown it on in the afternoon or something.
Yeah.
I can't explain it, but The Graduate does that as well. And both of them, similarly, I could listen to their soundtracks all day.
Well, I guess it's kind of, well, in an odd sense, it's like fine dining compared to like your favourite takeaway. Now, you're going to have your favourite takeaway more than like a fine dining, but you love both, but for different reasons. Or because they hit like different pleasure points.
Yeah, I mean, I do sometimes. I remember when it finished last time, I had this sudden urge to watch it again the next day, but that's not normally happened. And I know I won't watch it for a long time now. I want to go and watch some more. Strangely, I want to go and watch Once Upon a Time in America, even though aesthetically they're nothing like each other.
Yeah.
But there you go. I don't know that I'm very knowledgeable though.
No.
I mean, I headed east to watch it. I got where it was on the compass wrong. So then I drove to Birmingham because I thought it was Once Upon a Time in the Midlands. Yeah. I don't know what to do about it.
And then you ended up in Hollywood then?
I did, and Brad Pitt weren't even there. It's almost like he's not heard of our podcast. So, Becca, can you fact us?
I can give you some facts.
Alright.
Whether or not they'll be fun. Yeah, I've got a few random facts, I think, because we've obviously given you quite a lot of factage as we've gone along in our review. So in no particular order. So this kind of film regularly tops regularly, makes appearances in like the best of greatest films, for example. Every 10 years, is it? I think Sight and Sound do a list of top 100 films. The most recent one being 2022. Once Upon a Time, the West appears at number 95. On the previous list in 2012, it came in at number 78, so it's dropping out there. And then 10 years prior to that, in the 2002 list, the epic follow-up, Once Upon a Time in America, was actually number 79. So it's interesting to see where these films kind of placed on that list. Something I only discovered recently, probably a magazine did a list of 25 most dangerous movies. To quote them, the description is the films that rearrange your head to challenge your bedrock ideas about life, love, and the big sleep. It's generally sort of films that kind of upend the status quo, and as I say, sort of like challenge everything you think you know. And this film rocks up on number 16 on that list. And also, I was given one year a great big book. I think it's like Stephen Schneider's list of 1,001 films you must see before you die. and that's in there as well. It's a great big tome. And yeah, so it's always on the best of sort of film lists. I had to look up actually the character of Frank isn't on the AFI villains list, so I'm sorry about that one. I thought it would be, but it's not. But it probably should be because he's so terrible. Perfect. I'm eking out my 5 fun facts, so you have to excuse me. Perfect number 2. The McBain farmhouse location in Almeria can also be seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark as Marion's bar in Nepal, apparently. I think that's quite cool.
What bit? The outs?
I think just the outs. I think just the exterior of it. I think just kind of like the wooden exterior of it. Apparently,
I would never recognise that.
Apparently, it's the same.
We don't see a lot of outside, to be fair, and it's very different weather conditions. But yeah.
No, that's it, and also it's at night.
Yeah.
And it's full of drunken people.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, fun fact number 3, Leonie obviously shot some scenes in Monument Valley, as we mentioned throughout the course of the show. This is supposedly one of John Ford's favourite locations, so making it the first spaghetti western to actually be shot in the US. Fun fact number 4, some little casting stamps, Victoria Stamford, what's up? Casting bits and pieces. Clint Eastwood obviously not appearing in this film. He declined to appear, fearing he'd be typecast. This actually dented his career with Leonie, and that wouldn't be mended until the late 80s, months before he passed away. I think we mentioned that as a previous fact in this series.
Sorry, who's this? Clint?
Clint Eastwood, yeah. Obviously, he's not appearing in this film. And he was approached, and he said, no, thank you. Because he thought he would end up being typecast in this kind of nameless role.
Well, I just think it's a strange time to worry about being typecast.
Yeah, but he already is typecast.
Well, you've done 3 films.
You've done 3 already.
You've done 3 in 3 years, and you haven't done Dirty Harry yet.
Well, no, precisely. Yeah, he would then go on and be Dirty Harry, which is kind of pretty much the same.
I mean, I think he kind of like fell out with. Well, I won't say fell out, but I think he got fed up with being directed by Sergio Leone at this point.
Yeah, probably. I don't blame him.
I think there was. I think because I think he got frustrated because I read like during The Bad and the Ugly, he got frustrated with he disagreed with like come on, like the shots don't need to be this long for Christ,
Yeah, some of the it was artistic differences, really, wasn't it? Some of the and also I imagine there was a lot being lost in translation.
Clint is a very lean director as well. I don't even mean running times. I mean his process. His days aren't. I mean he's old now, but all the way back to the 70s, he's always directed relatively short days, relatively few takes, and relatively, I mean, he said it on Inside the Actor's Studio, none of this barking action stuff. He just quietly says, when you're ready. He's a very no fuss, no frills, short day, done. Calm environment director. Yeah.
Yeah, very chill, definitely. So, yeah, and also Henry Fonda was almost not in this film. Had to be sort of convinced, also just because he wanted to work with the director. Other actors considered for the role of harmonica would have included John Paul Belmondo, Warren Beatty, and Terence Stamp. Oh my god, how different would that have been? Also a very international cast, so a British actor in that role. And then fun fact number 5, the original script for this film was originally a whopping 436 pages long. Oh my god, can you imagine?
Well, yeah.
You think this film is long now?
I think the thing with the length, I remember saying, and the only coincidence is the name is somewhat similar, but we've talked about Tarantino tonight. I remember when I talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood on this show, and I said, I wouldn't normally patronise people by telling them how to watch a film, but I think with this film, Fistful of Dollars, I think throw it on, see what you think. You may like it, you may not. Up to you. Same with most of these things. But this film, just don't chase the plot, let it come to you. And I said that about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you sit there going, and what next? And what next? You're going to start getting frustrated. Just let the film unfold in front of you and you'll have a really nice time. Because the plot's all there. It's just not taking any time.
It just takes its time. And it's beautiful to look at. Deadly to know. Yeah, so that's my rumbling fun facts.
I was going to say something else. I was going to ask a question. If it's almost rhetorical in case anyone knows, why did he not direct a film for 12 years after the next entry? That's a hell of a gap.
Really long holiday.
I mean, I don't think he lived to a massively high age, did he? Or was the only when he died 60?
He wasn't very old, was he though?
Well, he just didn't do a film for so long. It was just like the next film.
Was he raising a family, perhaps?
I mean, he didn't do that many films full stop. I mean, his filmography, we could have done the whole thing quite easily. It's not that long.
Could have done a Leone season.
Well, you've got the Colossus of Rhodes in 1961. Then you got these, which we've covered. Then you got what we and that's it. Yeah, but from 1971 to 1984, he didn't do anything. Or he didn't do anything in film. I don't just mean he went and sat in an armchair for 12 years. You know what I mean?
He went to bed. I think it was just him developing Once a Time in America, because
it is an extraordinarily long and detailed film.
Yeah, because he apparently was offered The Godfather and he turned it down.
I did hear that
because he was too busy working on Once a Time in America.
I think he nearly didn't want to do this either because he was like, "Oh, I've done westerns, don't want to." I'm develop. Yeah, I think back then he was developing Once Upon a Time in America. I think it was only because like this one he had a chance to work with Peter Fonda. Yeah,
Henry Fonda.
Sorry, yeah. And of course Bronson got on board as well, so it's like, go on.
Yeah, I mean, Once Upon a Time in America's got some cast as well. I mean, it's a very, very long film, and I'm trying to think what version is on. I think normally you get the European cut, 229 minutes. So yeah, it's normally 3 hours 49 minutes. It's a long film. There's a 139-minute US release of it. It's just like, you cannot do that. Even if you think the film's too long, you can't do that to any film without butchering it. But it's a very different feeling gangster film, so I'd recommend you giving it a look. I don't know if we'll cover it. We'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks, because obviously this is a Western series. It is available to us if we wanted to, but we'll talk about that offline. It is very, very long though, and my experience of it last time was I did feel it. I did feel like, Christ, this is going on a bit, which is unusual.
It's not like you say. It's a very hard film as well. At the same time, it's not like it's just long. It's tough watching places, and you kind of spending time with characters. You like not very stoic, are they?
No. No,
so you're like,
we're supposed to identify with Noodles, but even he does such stuff that you wouldn't necessarily get on board with. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's some cast. It is some cast, and it's very rare to see a gangster film with that feel. But we'll leave it there. As for social media, you can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter.
Well, you can find me at Cinetronics. You can also find all the episodes on Podbean.
You can find me at Films on Wax on Twitter.
You can find us on Twitter at They Expect Us to Talk, on Facebook, Do You Expect Us to Talk, on YouTube, just search for Do You Expect Us to Talk. You can find all our reviews on there, and plus every series that we've done are compiled into handy playlists. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, Podbay, wherever you get your podcasts from, wherever you do find us. Please don't forget to rate us, review us, to like and share us on your podcatcher of choice. Thank you very much. I will find a way to surmise that somehow.
Well, you just did. Okay, so we've got, at the moment anyway, one more Leone to go, which means, Becca.
Do you expect us to talk will return with a review of Fistful of Dynamite, aka A Duck You Sucker?